There is so much more to discover about how the infrastructure of a community is related to its institutions and the organizations that are formed around common interest. And hopefully that common interest will be an interest in the future, the strength of the community, the knowledge of its young people growing into the next generation. Read Brave is one of these opportunities where all those partners come together in a common interest, but also being able to say, here is space for ideas to be shared. I think there's some modeling that will have to happen as well, because being part of a book group or this is not in the classroom. It's different than the classroom, so there might be different rules of engagement. And that's a great opportunity for young people to say, how can we be intellectually stimulated? How can we be challenging to each other? But most of all, as a culture person, an indigenous person, how do we employ listening as part of the learning and teaching process? It's not just a passive byproduct. It should be intentional as one of those skills that we need to apply in a learning situation. And I'm so looking forward to these opportunities to see across the city groups of young people in their community learning together by listening as they've been reading and taking those ideas and sharing them. This is an incredible question, because all the work I do in community, whether it's in intentional faith communities or in the social communities where I'm engaged, we're all trying to determine, what does it mean to be transformational? What does it mean to be able to use your strengths to continue to grow and to nurture new leadership, to empower people with their voices? And again, to be transformational means that we have to be intentional. We have to say, how can we take our weaknesses and turn them into strengths? And the intergenerational aspect of Read Brave, especially with this particular book, The Marrow Thieves, it's so indigenous in the reality that our community is always intergenerational, intertribal, and multilingual. And so being able to say all ideas are important, and sometimes your role is to be the learner, and sometimes your role is to be the teacher. And in indigenous culture, other than the recognition we have for elders as wisdom keepers, everyone has those opportunities throughout the course of the community's life. It may be possible to look at intergenerational opportunities for us to, again, be able to share these new ways to learn together, share new understandings and appreciation about how people are valued. And in the story, and then also I think in the community gathered experience, you have to take the time to recognize that somebody else's idea can be very helpful to you, or something that you'll need to retain and use later. And it didn't matter if it came from a small or a large person. That's the idea. The gifts are being distributed at all times, and you need to just be very present and value that person who's sharing that with you. Well, the first way I engaged was to read the stories and to be excited about the list as they come out. The second thing, which was just very current this weekend, one of our teachers at the American Indian Magnet School sent out a posting where she wants to have a reading group for the Marrow Thieves and to share it with the students. And of course, these would be students who are elementary and middle-aged students. And so she said, I want to get this started. So, are people willing to donate the books or to help pay for the study guides? And I wrote back right away. You can see the excitement in my voice. It was like, oh, yes, I read the book already. I think it's great. How can I support you? Tell me what I can do. I think there's going to be other opportunities like that throughout the year, where if people knew what young people were doing in these reading groups, and to even just take the language, read brave. It's a brave space to come in and learn. It's an understanding that reading is essential. So I think people can get excited and join our young people across St. Paul schools and St. Paul public libraries to really encourage them and partner with them. There is so much in this book. I know that there's a recognized emphasis on ecological disaster and a future where that disaster has certainly targeted American Indians and First Nations people in Canada. That is so real. It's so real because it has happened here, and we continue to suffer the consequences of the trauma of genocide and annihilation on this continent. So the realistic side of the book, it's not just the mythical future, it's what has actually happened. So I love that the book talks about water, and water is sacred. Water becomes part of the pathways of the journey. There is so much walking in the book. Walking, walking, walking. For Native people, that's certainly the way our lives were. We did walk. But the genocide that occurred was accompanied by forced relocation, where Native people were forced to walk. So there's so much embedded in this story that makes me just react emotionally to, I know what that meant for people. I know what it meant to suffer by walking everywhere. So that's the second thing about the book. The other recognition, I would say, is that there's so many cultural attributes, the recognition of elders, the family structure. It's not just a biological family, but you form families. You form family by culture, and you're welcomed into a family. So Native. That happens across all tribal people. And then the resilience that people have to maintain their sovereignty and their identity. That's the really serious side of the book, and I think that will have to be introduced to non-Native people because that's not an experience they've had, nor do people typically recognize that about Native nations. But being able to talk about how much our identity is so much a part of our sovereignty and our relationship with the land. If you don't come out of that experience, you won't catch that in the story. And then maybe the final thing is there are some very difficult scenes in the book, scenes of trauma, scenes of great loss. Yes, you can find yourself in tears with the book. And the ending is one where you can't draw a conclusion about what happens at the end. There's a promise that people will continue to work together and be resilient and to resist, but you don't really know what happens. And of course, that's also part of our Native experience. We're here in, this century, and we're still trying to determine, will our future be one that we can control, or will it be one out of self-governance where we're always having to resist a government that determines who we are, takes away identity, and then substitutes something else that's not real? I always say that being Indian means you're visible, but being in plain sight doesn't mean you have great visibility by other people. You are treated as being invisible. And there's so many things in this story that are out there. They're written on the page even. It's part of the drama. But unless you really know how to understand that and see that, it will be invisible. So there are a number of things in the book. I was realizing that a lot of Anishinaabe or Ojibwe language terms are sprinkled all throughout the story, and people may not catch those. There are descriptions of kinship relations that people also may not catch. There's descriptions of historical references, so the relationship to, in the story, the schools are now these artificially created institutions or building facilities that are part of, this chase and the terror. But the whole experience of residential schools and boarding schools, that was real. So people may not see those connections. The timeline for the book, is so much in the future. I think there is a sense of you really have to have a good leap of faith to be able to see how important Native memory is about never forgetting these experiences that have happened. And even as you move into a mythical future, that those things are always possibilities. So there's a lot of Native things that I think will need to be introduced, but that can happen in the Read Brave process, is to be able to say, we're going to help you with like a map. Here are the key codes at the bottom so that you can understand what you see in this map. Which brings me to the last thing. So much of the description, in addition to water, is land. The description of the forest, the urbanization, where things are so industrialized, there's cement. Whether there's been the breaking down in these urban scenarios or out in like the mountains and the fields and the forests where people go to hide. those connections to land are just part of who we are as Native people. And being able to say, we walked by and we were able to find medicine even in these woods. We were still able to find food in these woods. We were still able to find shelter in these woods. That's the survival techniques of Native people. And when you're Indigenous, you must know the land. And I think she expresses that through every character. And when danger happens, there's still a proximity to the land where you can find shelter. So whether it was in the caves, whether it was in the trees, from the very first page of the book or not, this description of trees, I just thought, boy, Native children need to understand this story and be able to talk about it with non-Native people, to say, there's so many things we need to share with you that you've probably just walked down the street and never even noticed before. So I'm excited. I'm really excited about what she expressed in the book, what the characters portray, and how there's so many things that are relevant to Native life. Well, Native people have always been here. We're just not usually seen. And our tribal communities, even though we're very diverse, more than 500 tribes here. And then if you look at First Nations people, and then Alaska Natives and Native Hawaiians, and then other Indigenous people, we have always been present. And some of our spiritual understandings of sacred space, the sacred directions, and a commitment to making decisions for 7 generations out for, the life and well-being of our people, those are voices that often are not heard. I am very hopeful that there will be a time where we won't keep talking about being the first Native person to do something. We've been part of these communities for so long, contributing. And when we're recognized for our leadership, that doesn't mean that we haven't had the community credentialing all along. Those things have already happened. We've already been well respected in our communities. But it's absolutely important for these voices to be recognized, because we are the ones who have done the most observing of what it means to be American, what it means to be no longer a homogenous society, to recognize how the differences of people arriving are things that we've had to interpret and respond to for centuries. So I think Native voices are really important because we're contributors, not just recipients. We are not passive participants. We are there making decisions, and this has been our land. So we certainly have a sense of this is home to us. And we have been great defenders of the well-being of this nation. So having those voices is very important. And we never just only talk about our Native people. I'm sad to say that there were times when I was serving on the school board, I think people assumed that I would only specifically address the issues of Native students. Absolutely, I wanted to address those and advocate for quality education, Indian education that was self-determined, and that we would have better outcomes. But being Native means that your life experience has always had multiple identities, and I think that the experiences that we bring will always be able to talk about what does it mean to no longer recognize the boundaries that are imposed by society, to be able to say we've had to be very fluid and mobile and adaptive in how we structure our communities and identify ourselves. So in the future, whether it's the library system or schools, public, charter, or private, or tribal schools, how are we really empowering young people with their minds to be able to say, we're ready for the future and we have much to contribute, and we're ready because we've been prepared by the wisdom of our elders and our culture. Well, I certainly connect it right there. And I do think it will be powerful for our Native youth. Walter Soboleff is a Tlingit elder who has passed away now, but he was very instrumental in establishing the Alaska Brotherhood and other large structures in Alaska to benefit people there. And one of the comments he made that I just love, he says, we are people who survived the Ice Age. That's in our family memories of surviving the Ice Age. So we need to tell our children we are intelligent, beautiful, adaptive, creative people. And I think this story will also do that, because the individuals, the characters, especially the youth characters, they're not superheroes. They're not wearing capes. They don't rely on weapons of mass destruction. They don't even rely on conniving and manipulating. There is a great humble honesty about how they are able to survive together, how they can wear cast-off clothing, that they've discovered along the way, and then when it wears out, they have to set that aside and find something else. So in all of their experiences, they are certainly adapting to the dangers and the opportunities that they have in front of them. I think this will be a great message for our Native people who are able to say, right, when I go home, we may not have all the technology in our house. We're not going on big family vacations. We may not even have a car. But in my household, I'm learning about who I am and who my people are. And our histories go back centuries, so we will be here for the future. That's the hope that I want them to be centered on. And that, I think, is the hope that if they share that with their classmates, as they learn the language. That was another thing in the story, how the language was so sacred and precious that they actually would have exercises in remembering words. Well, that's happening now. That's what we're doing with language revitalization. And so you actually can step into that story. Even though it's in the future, you can step right into that story and understand exactly what those young people in the book are doing, because it reflects what you may be doing right now in your own life. Well, the Idle No More movement was one where Native people said we're going to be standing up and being recognized because this is Mother Earth. This is where we come from, and we are protectors. So our songs, our ceremonies, our political thinking, our tribal nations, and our sovereign government has always been about protecting the earth. These opportunities are in front of us every day, and I think that making space for Native people is no longer a question. It's no longer an option. We are present. We know when to stand and arise. This year marks the commemorative anniversaries of the beginning of things like the American Indian Movement, National Indian Education Association, the Alcatraz, protest, where Native people have said, our voice will always be the voice to protect this land. And so matters of ecology shift immediately from just being a corporate conversation and a saving of national dollars to being able to say, let's really talk about saving the land. Let's protect the land. It's not only just the dollars involved, but it's the land itself. It is our home, and we love this Mother Earth. So there are just incredible opportunities of the relevancy of the book and what's happening in the headlines all around this country right now. I do so hope that as a community, we want to be able to provide the opportunity for Native authors to continue to have their materials widely distributed, and that in spite of the Dewey Decimal System that identifies, Native work often under history, always in the past tense, that we're able to say no. Both fiction, nonfiction, scientific endeavors, they're current, and Native authors need to be recognized all throughout our information systems so that not only our young people, but people across this country, especially those who are growing and understanding the world, that they'll see that we are key to making sense and what's relevant about who we are and the impact we have on future generations.